What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Really good interview yesterday with Karp. Well, I mean, it was a decent interview. I kind of think of these as like, let's get Karp talking interviews. Sometimes companies will do these sort of roundtable-ish CEO interviews where employees will come up with questions. We've done this with other senior leaders at our companies as well, where we'll get, the CPO or the CEO or the CFO, and we'll do these sort of internal roundtables, record them. But this is sort of in that line, in that vein, I think, of the kind of thing that they're going for here. It was an okay interview. Someone like Karp, I think you really need someone that is going to challenge him on some of the things that he says because it'll get better content. It'll get beneath the surface. So I really saw most of this as sort of surface level stuff, sort of talking point ish. But there were a couple clips in there that I felt were worth talking about, somewhat insightful, but also like someone like Karp. Like, I love Karp. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, this guy's awesome. This is someone that I would go and probably work with and enjoy it because there'd be a tension there. Like, I don't agree with everything Karp says, but I totally know that when he says something, he's coming from a place where he's thought it out. He knows exactly why he's making this argument, and he's prepared to defend it. And for the most part, he's usually right about most of the things that he's saying, but there's some blind spots. And what's interesting is that someone like me, I've spent my 20-year career in engineering, a good decade of it, scaling mid-stage startups. And so this is an interesting phase, and I've actually been through it more than he probably has. And so I think there's some things he's saying that to me look like blind spots from an engineering perspective, from a technical perspective, and we'll get into those. But I think there's this dismissive idea that companies that can scale, there's a theme in here, and we'll get to it when I go through the clips. There's this dismissive idea that being big and scalable is this step backward, that now you're building, quote, thin software. You're building software that has little value or little innovation, when in reality, to de-risk a software system to the point where it can scale is innovation. It's some of the hardest innovation, and it's what they're going to struggle with over the next decade or so. But anyway, let's look at some clips, and I'll take some breaks and cut back in, and we'll talk about it. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments section.
I mean, you remember all of our discussions and when Foundry started, it's like, and whenever, the thing is, when you're working on products that are not understood, like most people have like a report of what other people have done, and then now they're going to try and make it a little better and hire 5,000 people to sell it, right? Palantir doesn't do that. We've never done that. And what we do is we have lots of clients that are working on really cool products, and we begin to kind of iterate on what are the underlying problems that they're, of which they're not mostly aware, that would pre-solve not only the problems that they have, but the negative externalities of solving that problem. So very similar to the negative externality for most people of stopping terrorism was forgetting about civil liberties. The negative externality of protecting civil liberties was you had terror attacks. How do you solve both? But not that different. Like, how do you actually get an algorithm to be so functional that it is approaching or becomes what people call AI in a context where data is unlimited? How do you push that to the edge? How do you get Foundry to install in hours in a context like COVID, so that you can actually distribute the vaccine, where the databases like in the UK are massively siloed? And the problem is a question of, the answer to the problem will save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. But we were working on these problems before there was COVID. It's like there's a narrative like, well, suddenly COVID came and then Palantir flourished. But like, we built a product assuming disjunction. Yeah. And we've been building this product, and then there's, what does it mean to build a product? There's been many iterations. Of course, the original insight was, how do you manage transforms at scale while protecting data? Okay, but that's a very broad, statement to problems. And then there's a specific, solving the specific needs of each client while building a motor that is universally applicable requires a kind of depth and elasticity of the software and the code that very, very few institutions could even really approximate an understanding of, yet alone build. Then, managing that at scale so that we don't have to change our culture, which, Apollo looks to, Wall Street analysts who take the time to actually look at our products, which is not enough, honestly, but as like a unit economic nirvana, and that it is. But the reason why Apollo is important to us is not purely the unit economic nirvana of allowing us to manage, presumably limitless clients with the same number of resources. It's that it's a cultural nirvana. It allows us not to hire. We still roughly have the same number of people we did a year ago.
Yeah.
And, it's like, and then, but our company is expanding rapidly. And that allows us to have a very narrow, tight, and specific kind of culture while having a broad ability to service the world with our software.
Yeah.
All right. So in this initial part, when he's talking about what other companies do is they get a report of what some other software system is doing, and then they figure out how to make it slightly better, and then hire 5,000 people to scale it. Really, what he's complaining about there is like, oh, there's these companies and they don't really innovate. They just produce a system that can be easily replicated and deliver value to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers. Well, no shit, dude. Like that's what we invest in, right? Like a company has very limited potential value or utility if only a handful of people can access it, right? So and I think part of this is that, a large part of their business is consulting. And so in a lot of people's minds, and I'm sure that, okay, so like as human beings, we have this tendency to build up walls and use reason to defend bad ideas, right? And so like it's very easy to reason yourself into a position that says, hey, look, scalability sucks. It's all bullshit. It's all just cookie cutter. It's all the same. No, okay? Like in software, it's really easy to build black boxes that deliver value to a few people, and it's really hard to deliver something that is replicable and scalable to everyone and can deliver some utility to everyone. It's almost like you're on this curve where it's like the amount of customers you can reach versus the level of innovation you can achieve. And when you're trying to build a product that is long lasting, that is actually maintainable over time, the way you do that is you have to de-risk the system. Like in the software business, almost all products are going to fail. Almost everything you do is going to just be garbage at the end of the day. We see these statistics all the time. I mean, the big one right now is from Gartner on the level of failure in ML and AI-based software stacks. So as an engineer, a good engineer, you teach yourself over the years how to de-risk design, right? And basically one of the primary ways that we de-risk software applications in this industry is to make sure that we adopt behavioral driven development, which is basically to say that we're going to codify the specs of the system in tests, and then we're going to go out and we're going to build an implementation that lets this test pass, right? And that's the behavioral driven development it takes a long time typically for a company to get to that level to adopt it because it requires good architecture. You can't actually write a good test without knowing that the implementation has to be built with certain abstractions and loose coupling and these really good architectural principles that let you build a system this way. Most people would get lost in trying to think about those things, so writing the test up front makes no sense. They don't know how to abstract the system and design it properly so that you can codify it in a spec. They'll write the implementation and then they'll write a test that asserts the implementation is good, right? So, but the point here is that there's this transition that these companies go through before they can hire the 5,000 people to scale the business that involves refactoring to make the product scalable. And that's typically done by usually a total rewrite and adopting good architecture and getting people in the company that know how to build software this way, and then codifying your scope and specs, and that's generally how it's done. So I don't like his dismissive attitude towards the fact that companies with really large successful products with large customer bases, that they're somehow not innovating, because the fact that they can reach that many customers is in and of itself innovation. So I kind of don't like that. But the other part of this is really interesting. The reason I picked this clip out really is like what he's talking about when he says there's this trade-off between the trade-off for fighting terrorism, the civil liberties, or some of these other trade-offs he's mentioning. What he's really saying there is that all the interesting problems we want to solve involve complex systems. And the only way today we know how to learn something about a complex system is to interact with it, right? So we're constantly getting feedback with a policy that we make or a decision we do, and then this complex system gives us feedback, and we adapt to the feedback, because complex systems, if you look it up, go look up complex systems on Wikipedia. You can't reason about them. You can't predict their behavior. There's too many moving parts, right? And software, this is interesting, distributed software is a complex system. So is the human body, so are economies. But anything we want to know, anything meaningful about is a complex system. And what's interesting about this is that big data and AI and ML are allowing us to understand complex systems in a better way than just through interaction. And so I find that really telling, and it's really like Palantir's main value proposition when he's talking about like what is the software of tomorrow, and how did we think about it? It's really the software of tomorrow that is the one that lets us simulate complex systems and get the feedback ahead of time so we know what to do in reality. And if you can do that, if you can build a software system that does that, you're going to win, right? And I think that's what he's really saying here. But so as we think about as investors and as people looking to get into engineering, it is interesting to position yourself for this future, because I do think he's correct there. I do think that the companies that are going to survive and the software systems we build in the future are all about modeling complex systems.
Related to the people who are actually deep diving into what's available, like, who are we looking to recruit now? Has it changed? Or?
No, I think, much to the chagrin of Silicon Valley, who was investing in, consumer internet apps and various products that are largely at best described as carcinogens in our society, and as worse decided as like hyper carcinogens that transfer all the alpha away from individuals to a narrow set of people. We've been able to retain and recruit the very, very best people since inception. And this is, like, as you know, been a constant frustration for Silicon Valley, that we disproportionately got the best people to not only come to Palantir, but stay. Mm-hmm. And we are still very focused on recruiting the very best, most inquisitive, hardest working, insightful, primarily technical talent in the world from any place we can find it. And I would say, on that note, like, our recruiting is like our ability, our retention, our ability to recruit, and because the net has gotten wider, more people know who we are, but also because as technical people engage with our product, because they may just be looking at it as like an investment option, and they're like, wow, okay, this is real. And so, like, what we're seeing internally is we're getting our hit rate and getting people is going up. The quality is not typically. When people IPO, the quality of people you're able to recruit and retain goes down. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's been the case for us, because before we were very much niche. So if you were at a super elite school, who you might know people work at Palantir, and therefore you would know the quality of the engineers and the products. But if you weren't, you might not know it. Now, if you're just sitting out there anywhere in the world and like you're like, you've probably heard of us, and you're like, hey, engineers are very, very skeptical, as you know. You're an engineer. So if somebody's claiming, oh, this product has great software, what's the first thing you're going to do? Yeah. Go think, oh, this isn't great. I'm going to go check it out. Yeah, and it's like, it's usually, by the way, not so great. It's usually like 5,000 salespeople and a completely rusty product that was randomly written somewhere and has limited utility and negative utility in most contexts outside of what it was created. So you come to Palantir and, it's like, you just go looking at Palantir, like, okay, well, let me look at what I think they're doing with the code base. And you're like, wow, that's cool. That's cool. Wow, that's super cool. This looks like a problem they're actually working on that they're not yet talking about. I'd like to be involved. And then, of course, once you've gotten past that hurdle, then you look at the quality of the people. And, technical people have very precise ideas of what that would mean, i.e. people as good as I am or better. And so then you look at internally at Palantir, and what you're expecting to find as a technical person is 50 marketing people that claim they know software because they stayed at Motel 6 or they worked at a bank covering software in the 80s, but have no earthly clue what we're doing now. And what you find is, like, leadership that from beginning to the end actually is working on driving these things. And that just leads to a recruiting charisma. And we're really seeing very strong interest in joining Palantir. Last not least, we've run the company primarily for the interest of, it's like for the people of Palantir. And I would say, part of what has always made me and still makes me an economic progressive is, we ran the company where everybody has a part in the company. From an equity perspective and a participation in the company, we also give people at Palantir enormous responsibility, which is appealing. If you're, you just say you've just left school and you believe and maybe are the world's best software engineer of one archetype or another. Do you really want to work 30 years under somebody before you actually get to write code to the trunk Or do you want to be writing code that's actually used from people that might actually know some things about writing code that you didn't learn in school that are at your level or, conceivably better?
All right. Yeah, no, there's no love lost between Karp and the social media bros. If you haven't watched my video, You Are the Product, check it out. I go into a deep dive there into why this application of AI and AI algorithms to social media is leading to such bad societal outcomes. There's a boatload of evidence there to support that, including research from social scientists, including Jonathan Haidt. If you can watch The Social Dilemma as well, which is also a really good movie that talks about why these social media companies are so cancerous. But yeah, no, so I love seeing Karp call this stuff out and that they're building software that enhances human intelligence through the application of AI and ML rather than creating essentially ad tech platforms that use dopamine to keep people engaged in a really negative sort of experience. So I love hearing him call that out. And the other thing that's interesting here in this clip is that Karp often calls himself a progressive, right? And he talks about how they're able to recruit top talent. Sometimes I think like it really speaks to me because I'm a technical person and I've found Palantir and like invested in it and I follow it closely because I'm really interested if they're solving this problem. It's like the biggest problem we have in tech. So it's kind of like speaks directly to me when he's talking in this clip. But what's more interesting is his philosophy on labor. And I don't know if it's going to work out in the end for him. And this, look, yes, we need to retain top people and we have to give them stock. Okay, like it's just a fact of the matter. Every startup you go to, every FANG company gives massive stock-based compensation, but they're also delivering massive value on the other side of that. And it can't just be you give people equity to retain them, right? The best thing, the best thing to recruit top-notch engineers is give them a problem worth solving, right? And he talks about that in this clip as well. But the problem with the stock-based compensation and this sort of progressive mindset that labor should own the company is that we live in a time when you better make damn well sure that the engineers all share a cultural value or you could tear the company apart. And B, you don't want to devalue your stock for investors. And I get frustrated with Karp on a lot of levels with this because as an investor, share dilution is something we need to worry about. And if your growth rate isn't going to outpace that dilution by a substantial margin, we as investors are going to pull the plug. We're not going to sit there and deal with that. And Karp, I think, on some level, doesn't give two shits about Wall Street and doesn't care about the markets. But what he doesn't realize, the markets will make you pay. They will extract an obscene toll on your company if you fuck them over too long. And he's got to understand that at some point you have to play the game and deliver value to the markets. And no one likes that. No one likes to have to play, like feel like they have to service the man or something, to like, like it's like their company's being hijacked from them in a way. But he's going to have to have a come to Jesus moment at some point and understand that, like, look, man, you're going to have to play the game a little bit. And maybe diluting your shares with all of this equity, you're going to have to balance that desire you have to deliver on this progressive mindset with the realities of capitalism. So on some level, I think he's going to have to rethink that. And Palantir is going to have to rethink who they give equity to, over what periods of time, how they record that, and then how do they address the market and what the market wants to see from the company. They're going to have to make that a positive feedback loop at some point.
And so that there'll always be a way in which Palantir will overperform technically compared to other institutions. In my humble opinion, dramatically outperform any other institution in the world on the software product. I mean, if you just look, like normal companies have one product that is 10 years old and then they're acquiring people, acquiring companies, and there's a lot of technical issues in that are massively underestimated. Because like actually these products the code bases are not meant to come together. But even culturally, there's obviously enormous issues. Palantir has built what amounts to hundreds of products. Like Foundry is hundreds of products in one product, fully integrated, and now will be made also fully disintegrated. So it's like we're really, really good at that. Enormously good. So we significantly outperform all others on the technical development and delivery. And again, we're outperforming people if you do apples to apples today. If you do apples to apples, we're simultaneously betting on what people are going to be doing tomorrow. And then so it's like a Hegelian thing where when you get to tomorrow, the stuff that even if it worked today is not going to work because it doesn't conform to the expectations of what an enterprise is going to have to do in 5 years. And we saw this in government with PG. We saw it in the operational context with Gaia. We've seen it, on the data protection side throughout the history of our company. We saw it in like the modularity, non-modularity of Foundry, its ability to integrate massive data sets. In a COVID context, we have limited access to people. We've seen it in industrials and supply chains. We've seen it in emissions context, reducing emissions, in producing more efficient motors. We're seeing in the AI context, but you always have to, if the curve is like this in our production, and the normal curve would be like that in software production, the monetizing the curve. So if like a normal company would produce this and then they'll monetize this, we produce like something that like is nearly unbounded, but then we have to do that because our monetization will always be less than the curve itself. Whereas actually what most software companies are doing is they're producing a much smaller integral of like actual software production than the revenue they can extract from that production. Whereas we're producing a nearly unbounded integral where we monetize, we have to learn over time, how do you actually extract revenue value out of that, because the full value of the integral shows up in 5 years.
Yeah.
In the common sense consciousness of more kind of conventional businesses and financial people. And so that's another reason why internally we have to be so focused on building this like transformational software that's existential to the future and highly relevant now, because we will never compete on the axis of extracting more value than the value you've created that other companies are just much better at.
Yeah.
And so.
All right, so let's cut the bullshit. All right, so look, when he's in there explaining that this integral, that we're building is way up here and it's forward thinking, all these years out. In the same sentence, he says that the time to value for the average customer, the full time to value is 5 years out after acquisition for the average business. That is not a good thing, right? So and it's really bizarre because he says, he's basically saying we're never going to scale like IBM or Microsoft or, Oracle or these other companies that are the companies when he says like, Foundry is 100 products in one, and all these other companies they went out and they bought all these other software systems and tried to combine them and the code bases are different. He's talking about ERP suites. And if he's saying that we're never going to scale like a Salesforce and IBM and Oracle, whoever, I don't know if I want to invest in your company, dude. Like maybe bring the value proposition down so you can get it into something that scales and delivers. The time to value for the customer is much shorter, the full time to value of that integral, because your giant 5-year thing where you've like solved every problem on earth, the problem with that is it's riskier, right? Because like time to value is one of the key attributes of the risk vector in technology, and so. For me, I would rather see Palantir solve smaller problems and maybe cut the high-minded idealist bullshit and throw that out and deliver on real value today and iterate continually over the years. Yes, you will eventually add more value to that system for your customers, but you can't sit there and say we're never going to be able to do that. That's a warning sign for investors, and it shouldn't be your goal as a company either to always be working on this really advanced system that can't deliver value quicker for larger amounts of customers. That's not a form of innovation, in my opinion. But to Palantir's credit, they are way ahead of some of the competition here, and I think they're doing a great job of building product. It's just fundamentally because most of my career I've been involved in scaling mid-stage startups like this. You can't have that sort of leadership. Proposing that we're going to solve this massive problem and it's going to be this. Our system is just the shit and we're building, the coolest thing ever, and it's okay if it doesn't scale and it doesn't deliver value for our customers, full value anyway, for 5 years. No, you have to be confronted on that. People need to tell you that's bullshit. You need to scope down the mission to achievable goals that you can iterate on over time that deliver immediate value to hundreds of thousands of people. That's a successful software company. However, they are working on that, and in this interview, he does talk about that is their biggest challenge too. At some level, is that we do need to scale, and so I know that they're considering. And what's interesting too is just the bullshit around denigrating companies that do this well. Like, in 2 minutes later in this video, you watch the rest of the video. This is the last clip I'm gonna play. But like literally like 2 minutes later, he talks about how these other companies are like a digestive system, and how the software goes through this digestive system where they figure out how to scale it and market it and turn it into something that 5,000 people can sell, and that's just like this soulless piece of poop that comes out the other end. Like no, man, like you can't actually say we want to be. This is the biggest challenge we have, and then just denigrate it at a cultural level, that if we ever get to this level, then we've lost who we are. This is the kind of bullshit that someone who quotes Hegel would actually come up with, right? Like, I hate Hegel, by the way. But regardless, this is the kind of thing that progressive mindset can do, in the sense that, like, you can't be conflicted on this level. You need to have, like, a clearer vision, in my opinion, as to what you want to do. However, obviously, they have some amazing leadership. And again, guys, I love Karp. Like, I'm not trying to bag on Karp. Like, I think he's an amazing leader, and I think he's doing fantastic things. But I think that on some level, we need to be honest and have good discussion about, how do these things play out over time? How do they actually hurt or help your company? And when you have 1.5 million investors who are banking on that, like, I actually think you have an obligation to do better than to just kind of, hope for an outcome. So yeah, but I mean, overall, I thought it was a good interview. I like to see inside of Karp's, like, sort of how Karp is approaching problems. I would like to see a little bit more pressing questions. Like, it would be cool if someone could challenge him a little bit on these suppositions, maybe get, a technical question about, like, hey, our code base is super fragmented because we've had to do a lot of customization, and we've, improved that over time. But, like, is it the best thing in the world to think that we should be building one-offs and then calling it product? Or, like, is it really that soulless to have 5,000 people who can sell your product? Because, like, as Peter Thiel points out in his book Zero to One, one of the biggest challenges for a company is distribution. It's one of his 7 tests for a successful startup, right? Is, can you solve the distribution problem? And if you have a software, it doesn't matter how great it is, it doesn't matter how, impactful it is. If you can't scale it, if you can't distribute it at a cost and time horizon where you can actually, monetize it and gain value from it, then you don't have a successful business, right? So, like it would be cool to see people come in and kind of challenge him on some of these ideas, and also just the idea that, like, you can give equity to everyone. You can't. You have to kind of balance the needs of the market and the needs of the company with what equity you can give and the value that the people are delivering for that equity. And then also that, on some level, organizations become more hierarchical as they scale. So you have both cross-functional teams that get together to solve a problem, and it could be people from different parts of the hierarchy within the corporation. Then you have the mission-oriented teams that define the hierarchy and how people will report. In every single startup I go to, man, or not a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, like, they don't like the hierarchy. They want to form cross-functional teams, and they just want to get together and solve cool problems. And the successful ones find a way to do both. And so I think there's some challenging on the ideology that, hey, man, you are going to have to provide some discipline and structure, and you are going to look a little bit like those companies you like to bash. But, successful ones like Google's culture has been amazing at fostering both the mission-oriented structure that lets the company achieve long-term goals with the cross-functional teams that can solve immediate problems and innovate. So I think on some level it'd be cool to see them kind of talk about that, and maybe get someone in the room that can be like, hey, how do we look more like a Google in 10 years, And shouldn't we care about share dilution? And shouldn't we care about how the market reacts to what we're doing? Because we have 1.5 million people who have their savings in our company, So I think it would be good to have someone in the room kind of challenging. So, Palantir, if you're watching, next roundtable, whoever's being interviewed, ask some hard questions. And when you hear someone say something that may not be correct or sounds contradictory, just, challenge it a little bit. But, overall, Karp's an amazing human being. We are better off having this person here. And the world is better off for someone like this running Palantir. But be critical. Like, don't let your your passion for the company and outpace your critical thinking skills, and always be questioning, always be reevaluating, and try to pick at some of these things CEOs do, because I will tell you, CEOs are leaders for a reason. They get people to follow them, right? And so you always have to be cautious, because CEOs are very good at manipulation on a certain level, and they know how to frame things in a way that sounds great, but in reality, if you actually listen to what they're saying and then play it out logically and question them, it's not always a good thing, right? So always understand that CEOs are very good at getting people to follow their direction and basically share a vision with other people. They're very good at getting, other people to share in a common vision and goal, and that's great. And that's one of the things I love about Karp. He's really effective at doing that. But on another level, we as investors need to question and ask good questions and kind of point out the contradictory statements, some of the oversight, as far as understanding that broader market forces do matter, investor value matters. You have to at some point, worry about those people. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy the video. And again, I'm not bashing Karp. I love Karp. It's just that if you really respect someone and you really want to, if you want to have attention in a dialogue, you don't want to have to just all be, marching in lockstep, all hail the white paper, like, no, we don't want to be doing that here. Anyway, but I hope you guys like the video. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time.